I'm originally from Kerala, which is in India, and we have a matriarchal system. We used to have a matriarchal system where the women's role was well, it was almost all-powerful. Things have changed somewhat now, and I would say that the situation has reversed. Another thing that really resonated with me was when the DG was talking about the family. I mean, I have 3 young daughters. And my eldest daughter, who's following classes at one of the schools here, she said to me, she came home one day and she said to me, "Hey, Mom, you know what? I'm the only girl in my maths class, and I have 6 other boys, and that's it. So this is maths higher." And she was the only one in her class. So it goes to show that from what the representative from WEF was saying, the change needs to happen really at the grassroots. The mindsets have to change. But having said all this, for all of you who don't know me, my name is Suja Rishikesh Mavroidis, and I'm Director of the Market Access Division at the WTO. I'm honored to moderate this session, which has as its theme WTO Members in Action to Empower Women, the Buenos Aires Declaration on Trade and Gender and Beyond. In addition to the moral case that was referred to, again, which I think is very, very powerful, the economic case for empowering women has been made. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Both the evidence and the literature go to show that women play a vital role in the economy and, if given equal opportunities, could contribute to economic growth and social inclusion at all levels, global, regional, and national. But the question, of course, which remains is how does trade, and more particularly the WTO, play this role in delivering opportunities for women, and what is their impact on women? And in this regard, I wanted to share an anecdote with you. I was at a dinner, informal dinner with friends outside of the trade group, and we were talking about women and women's empowerment. And I think, I made the link, of course, to the WTO, given that I work here. And the question was raised, but, how do WTO trade rules, which we think are gender neutral, how can they at all help in this whole conversation? And, I have to confess, I'm actually new to this area myself, although it's very important to me, but as an exercise, it is new to me. And I was just thinking about it, and I said, at the end of the day, you have the rules. But as we always say, devil is in the details. It's how you implement the rules. And it's when you implement the rules that the challenges keep emerging. And I think it's here that we can make a big difference in the way we implement the rules, and we implement the rules making sure that we are gender sensitive about that. So perhaps this is where the discussion should move forward. The Market Access Division deals with the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and this is, of course, one agreement which would lend itself to this discussion on women empowerment and enabling women to be more part of the trade process. And of course, we heard from the previous panel that there is this discussion on MISMEs and electronic commerce, which could do the same. But this morning, to help us to delve more into the subject, we have a distinguished panel before us. We have Ambassador Harald Aspelund from Iceland, Ambassador Christopher Onyanga Aparr from Uganda, Ambassador Negash Kebret Botora from Ethiopia, and Deputy Permanent Representative Margaret Mary Lungu Kaemba from Zambia. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for having taken the time off their schedule to come here and to share your perspectives. And I imagine that some of the questions that the audience would have, and I hope that you will address in your interventions, would include, and of course this is not an exhaustive list of questions, but these are some of the questions that actually did come to my mind, and we can go back, and they were addressed, but it's always useful to come back to these issues. What are the links between trade and women's empowerment? How do you see the implementation of the declaration, and what would be the next steps? What would you expect from the WTO in this regard? And what is your government's perspective and experience on how to deliver economic opportunities to women? And how do you see the issue evolve in the future in the WTO? In terms of organizing the session, I would like to leave the panelists around 7 minutes each for their intervention. Then I would like to really open the floor for comments, questions, and observations from the audience, where I know that there is a lot of reflection about these issues, and you would like to share them. And I would, at the end, like to, time permitting, return to the panelists for any final comments, and then conclude the session. And I hope to do that all in 33 minutes. We keep to the time. That will be a challenge, but we'll try. So I'd like to start the session off with Ambassador Aspelund, Iceland. And I believe Iceland played a really important role in creating that declaration. And I think we would all very much enjoy hearing a little bit more about how the process unfolded. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, and happy International Women's Day. It's a very good day, and we should celebrate it. And I thank WTO and the DG for the increased focus on women's participation in trade. I thank you for organizing this event today and giving me the opportunity to speak on our declaration on this important day. It's very well suited. On the slide, on the picture there, you see a little lamb in the corner, right down corner. I want you to think about it and wonder how it might be linked to what we are doing. And I will revert to it in the end. So what are the links between trade and women's economic empowerment? That's one of the questions. That is exactly the question that we pose in the declaration. So this is a very important question. It was indeed an historical moment in Buenos Aires when more than 120 members and observers decided to place women's empowerment at the heart of the trade agenda, and where we adopted the declaration on trade and women. And I will briefly touch upon where the declaration comes from and also what our next steps are. The declaration has a support of a broad membership of WTO, and we did feel the momentum, how the momentum was building up in the days before Buenos Aires. Only a week before the meeting, we had half of that support. This photo grasps a little bit the atmosphere at the handing over of the declaration to the chair of the Ministerial Conference. It was supposed to be a very quiet family photo moment, but it ended up to be a very loud and emotional moment. I took this photo myself on my cell phone in the escalator above this room, and the whole area was crowded with people grasping this moment. And it was a great moment. The World Economic Forum representative said just in the session we had this morning that it would take 217 years to reach our goal of gender equality at the current phase. But I'm convinced that we are now living a shift in that phase. And I'm also convinced that those that will not participate in this momentum that we have, they will simply lag behind. Yeah, this is a photo, a close-up of the handing over of the declaration to the chair. The declaration was, it created some debate. This photo is from MC11. It says that the new gender proposal is pinkwashing new issues. It's a strong message, and it's true that some members made the point when they were gathering support for the declarations on e-commerce and MSMEs, that these new issues would help women's economic empowerment. And that's true. I suppose these new issues could do that. But the Declaration on Women and Trade is not about pinkwashing the other new issues. That declaration, our declaration, is not prescribing anything about rule-making on new issues. It's more about understanding better how trade plays a role when it comes to gender equality. What are the gaps and what we can do about the gaps. So the background. In recent years, the focus of the trade agenda has been increasingly on inclusive trade. How we can ensure that trade benefits all. And we have also noticed that men are much more visible in trade, international trade, than women. It's so in my country, and I suppose it's in all countries. And we want to understand why that is, and what are the gaps and what we can do about the gaps. And we want to understand what impedes women's participation in trade. For instance, do women have less access to finance? And why is female representation on company boards only 14%? And we want to address this. With these questions in mind, we decided to establish a group, a trade impact working group, under the auspices of the International Gender Champions in Geneva. The idea was to galvanize the Geneva community on issues related to trade and the empowerment of women. And to organize the group, the group has set up an action plan in which one of the actions was to adopt a declaration at MC11, which we did. The group is co-chaired by Sierra Leone, Iceland and the ITC, and it's open to all WTO members and the international organizations here in Geneva. The objectives of the declaration is to provide a practical guidance, a framework and a platform for us, the members, to foster more inclusive trade agenda as we seek to ensure that trade will benefit all. And there are set out key focus areas to help us to make our trade and development policies more gender responsive. So what's next? Now it's time to implement the declaration and to put women's empowerment at the heart of our inclusive trade agenda. We agreed to collaborate with a focus on the 5 key areas. We will exchange information on policies and programs to ensure women's participation in trade, for example, through the WTO trade policy reviews. We will also share best practices for analyzing our trade policies and monitoring the effects on women's participation in trade. We will also share methods and procedures for collection of gender-focused data. And we will work together to remove barriers for women's economic empowerment, as well as ensure that Aid for Trade supports tools and know-how for analyzing, designing, and implementing more gender-responsive trade policies. And to understand better trade and women's empowerment, we will hold a series of seminars in coordination with the relevant international organizations. The declaration prescribes specific themes that will be explored and discussed over the 2 years until MC12. A series of 6 seminars are being organized. The first one on gender-based analysis of trade policies will be held by Canada here in Geneva at the WTO on March the 16th. So please mark that important event in your calendar. I believe you have on your table more details on that event. And then other seminars will follow on topics such as enhancing women entrepreneurs' participation in public procurement, connecting women entrepreneurs to international value chains, for promoting financial inclusion for women, and trade agreements, and women in digital trade. If any of you would like to participate or contribute to these panels, please let us know. The Trade Impact Working Group will also be launching a series of commentaries on topics covered in the seminars. These will be then published on the website of the International Gender Champions, and then reproduced as a guide to be presented at the 12th Ministerial Conference in 2019. So this was the end of my presentation. Maybe the lamp, I'm sure that you were all thinking about it. But this has no specific meaning in my mind. It's simply a very typical picture and describing the typical weather in the mountains of Iceland, since I'm coming from Iceland. But I'm sure that you found a link, because there is no issue that is not related to gender equality.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was very interesting, because I was there at Argentina, but I never knew that all of this was happening. So that was very useful to know. And I will turn straight away to Ambassador, if you could take the floor, maybe just to respond to some of the questions I raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I take this opportunity to thank the WTO for holding this event to mark the International Women's Day. And I would like to say congratulations to all the ladies who are in the room here on their day. But I've always not thought that women have got a special day, because I think every day, to me, is a woman's day. But because humankind is trying to do and carry out some kind of transformation, they want to hear themselves talking about certain issues over and over, rather than recognizing the practical aspect of it. Madam Moderator, our participation here today is premised on the belief that the Buenos Aires Declaration is a new issue as far as WTO is concerned. And any new issues in the WTO must be discussed after consensus has been reached. Has been reached. And in this regard, I will make my remarks today in the spirit of exploration. As an exploratory discussion, I will set out to comment on the prevailing situation, mainly in Africa and in my own country, Uganda. I will not be specifically stuck to the issues of the WTO per se. We all know women make up a very vital part of the world's economic, social, and political lives. The African continent recognizes the values, this critical role, and that is why in aspiration number 6 of the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, the people of Africa seek to have an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of the African people, especially its women and youth. The people of Africa specifically seek to empower the African women in all spheres with equal social, political, and economic rights, including the rights to own and inherit property, sign contracts, register and manage businesses, and enable rural women to have access to productive assets like land, credit inputs, and financial services. Just like elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, women in Uganda face deeply rooted obstacles to achieving their potential and utility. Not only does persistent gender inequality affect women, it impedes economic and social progress in the region. The Human Development Report of 2014 estimates an annual GDP losses from the persistence of these gender gaps at US$ 90 billion between 2010 and 2014, reaching a peak of US$ 105 billion in 2014. Furthermore, the African Development Bank has stated, eliminating gender inequality and empowering women could raise the productive potential of a large number of Africans, delivering a huge boost to the continent's development potential. In Uganda, although women comprise 53% of the labor force, that is 86.2% in the informal sector, 42% are taken on as unpaid family workers. In addition, the male to female wage gap stands at about 39%. This gap in productivity is of meaningful concern both to GDP growth and to the distribution of income between men and women. However, the government of Uganda has for long recognized the importance of promoting women's economic empowerment towards sustainable development by strengthening their access to education, health, and promoting women's participation in politics. The Uganda Gender Policy adopted in 2007 underlines our government-backed programs that empower women in the economy. It focuses on many means of livelihood and employment for women, as well as macroeconomic management at the international level. Government has adopted the following policies to support gender mainstreaming. We have National Gender Policy, we have Equal Opportunities Policy and its action plan, we have Employment Policy and the National Policy on HIV and World of Work. The National Action Plan on Women was adopted to promote gender mainstreaming in all development plans and programs. It also promotes affirmative action in political representation at various positions, e.g., each of the 112 administrative divisions in Uganda is an elected woman parliamentarian, whom we call the district member of parliament. And girls are added whenever they want to join the higher institution of learning. If we see that the boys are a little bit higher, we give the girls an extra 1.5 points in the entry point in order to enable them to join the institutions of higher learning. The National Development Plan also contains specific action plans to mainstream gender issues in all aspects of development. On this day in the year 2016, Uganda joined the rest of the world to commemorate the International Women's Day under the national theme, Women's Economic Empowerment. And since we know the activities in the economy includes trade, so probably this ties well with the topic of today. A vehicle for sustainable development in recognition of women's contribution to the development of Uganda, investing in women's economic empowerment sets a direct path towards gender equality, poverty eradication, inclusive economic growth, sustainable development. Women make enormous contributions to the economies by participating in business, especially if you go to Uganda today, most of the local markets around cities are manned by, are women, I don't know, by women. Politics, agriculture, as entrepreneurs, employees, or by doing unpaid care work at home, as it has been the tradition in African context. Women who are economically empowered tend to be change agents in the society. Now, in the same year, that is 2016, the government unveiled a 53 billion shillings. This is roughly maybe in terms of dollars, you could say also $53 million probably. Women entrepreneurship program aim at increasing women's competitive edge in the business sector. The project is intended to support women in the micro, small, and medium enterprise subsector through provision of interest-free credit, technical advice for appropriate technologies, value addition, and market information. Uganda has ratified key international and regional human rights instruments for empowerment of women, including the 1995 Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa. A number of gender-sensitive labor laws, policies, and regulations have been instituted nationally, including the Constitution, which upholds the principle of equality and protection of the economic rights of men and women together, with regards to employment and opportunities, right to safety and health, and freedom from discrimination. Studies have revealed that 60.1% of the active borrowers from microfinance institutions are now female, and 31.9% are males. The Uganda National Household Survey 2012 and 2013 indicates that 49.4% of the proportion of working population engaged in subsistence production is female, and 36.9% male. You can deduce from these figures I'm reading to see the women's position in the role they play in the economies. All the above efforts have significantly improved the level of women's economic empowerment in our country. The government continues to work towards creating more conducive policies and regulatory environment, enacting gender-responsive policies that will accelerate issues of gender parity in all the sectors of economy, particularly in the areas of governance, education, health, employment, agriculture, trade, and industry, as well as access to justice and financial services. In conclusion, Madam Moderator, a recent study done by Plan International, State of the Women's Girls Report 2014, Pathways to Power, notes that girls and women are powerful forces behind economic development and sustainability when empowered with the required skills, opportunities, and accorded a conducive environment to enable them reach their full potential. Achieving this goal is everyone's responsibility, especially as far as my country is concerned. This is a very good discussion, and I have been pleased to be part of it. I suggest that given the peculiar nature of the WTO, we are not sure that this item fits well within the construct of the mandate of the Marrakesh Agreement. We should continue building on the good work we have done at the level of the United Nations. We should also ensure that we finalize the outstanding issues in the DDA, Doha Development Agenda. Most of the reform we would undertake, for instance in agriculture, would make it easier for our mothers and daughters who are largely employed in the agricultural sector to make a better living and probably to trade as you want them to trade. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Aparr. Thank you. We take note that your remarks are made in an exploratory manner, and thank you really for your insight. I mean, certainly what I took away is that Uganda does believe this to be an extremely important issue and is putting into place both policies and measures to ensure that there is gender parity and women's empowerment. So that was extremely useful information. Thank you very much. I'd now like to turn to Ambassador Negash Kebret Botora from Ethiopia. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let me begin by expressing my a bit jealousy, because when I heard that the DG Azevedo has two daughters and 3 granddaughters, and Suja said she has 2 daughters, 3, and I have only 1. You should see me as someone who should be empowered to have more daughters. Of course, I am excluding my wife. I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity, at least to share my thoughts with you, with the participants as well as members of the panel discussions here. And what I intend to do is to just leave you with some points under each question, because we have been asked 5 questions. I'm not going to read you a text, but just to leave you with some points. The first question is, what are the links between WTO and women empowerment? I personally believe there is a strong link. There are strong links between the two. As we know that the WTO is a rule-based multilateral international trading system, and integration of women into this system is very critical and useful, basically for 2 things as far as I'm concerned. The first one is it will increase the economic opportunities or economic empowerment of women. And secondly, the society would benefit from this empowerment of women, because women constitute most of the countries, the majority in the society. Probably I can give you evidence when we discriminate women economically and socially, then the cost is too high. I can give you 2 studies by the United Nations Development, UNDP, and the World Bank, which is studies were conducted in 2016. They said that, I'm referring to the African statistics, they said that from 1960 to 1992, I think Africa has costed, because of the economic and social discrimination against women, 105 billion USD, which means around 6% of the continent's GDP. And of course, when you compare it with East Asia, that's completely different. So you can see that the integration of women in the international trading system is very critical, not only at the national level, but also at the regional level. And we know that women, most of them, especially take part in the informal sector, in the small trades. And the benefit that we see in the export sector, especially for women, is much better in terms of better payment and conditions. Therefore, their involvement, their increased involvement in global production chain, supply chain, is very important because it will have a direct impact on their empowerment. Nevertheless, we know that there are challenges as well in this area for women. The first one is, of course, access to credit finance. And second is acquiring knowledge needed to know about the procedures about the global trade standards, and also information access to the kind of export items and also the international networks of markets. I think this information is critical for them. Of course, this morning also in the first panel we discussed about the digital divide, which is also another area of difficulties for women. And I think this is where the WTO comes in, because the WTO has its own comparative advantage, especially in terms of giving technical assistance in capacity building and training, entrepreneurial skills development, and using especially the aid for trade initiatives in order to increase the employment opportunities for women and help women also to access finance, as well as also to enable them to participate more and more in the global supply chain. The second question is with regard to the implementation of the declaration. What will be the next steps as well? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that this is an important collective initiative taken in Buenos Aires, the first one by both members of the WTO and observers, which I think by itself it's an important step. And this declaration seeks to remove the barriers and also foster women's economic empowerment in the international trade. Therefore, we need to keep the spirit of the Buenos Aires in order to effectively implement this declaration. For that, I think we need to have a political will and firm commitment. These are critical in terms of implementing the declaration objectives and also its intended goals. With regard to the WTO, definitely WTO is included in this implementation stage in a very critical way, as I earlier indicated, because of the technical expertise that they have in terms of technical training and other sorts of support for women empowerment. The declaration, what I think is important, because it aligns the WTO members, and including the observer members of the WTO, with the 2030 agenda, specifically with SDG 5, which is on the gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. Therefore, the declaration shouldn't be seen in silos, in isolation, but it has to be seen in the greater picture of the international agendas, even including the African continent, the 2063 agenda. Therefore, what should be the next step in terms of this declaration? I believe that we have to identify those critical enablers in order to empower women, and at the same time also to identify those critical challenges that will impede their promotion and the participation in the international trading system. There should be a necessity to ensure that the gender trade nexus has to be mainstreamed at all levels, national, regional, and global levels. Other indicator, the 2030 Agenda is another framework. Therefore, the implementation of the declaration with the support and assistance of the WTO, in particular, the WTO has to take into account in its technical cooperation program the focus on enhancing the capacity of women. With regard to the third questions, some of the points that I have is definitely WTO, what it can do. I already indicated to some of those things that WTO can help, especially in terms of the international trade financing and also technical assistance to build capacity of women. And in particular with MSE is very important, as we know that the impact of MSE strategies are very glaring when it comes to women empowerment in the economic sense, as well as their participation in the International Trade Center. The other thing what the WTO can do is to partner with, which has already started, which has been doing also a lot, the WTO, but it has to increase its participation with some of the international organizations that are focusing on women. For instance, UNCTAD itself has this important aspect of supporting women empowerment. And the ITC, International Trade Center, is also another. I think there need to be some sort of international partnership context perspective for this. I know that ITC, for instance, they have this, what they call the JAC, this Joint Advisory Group. They have annual work program. I think they have to include, they have to enhance the women component in their program. I know that they have been helping a lot, especially women in the private sector, in the private business, but they have to include this also in their work program. I think there should be a need for the creation of platform where stakeholders should further discuss on how we can support women's empowerment, and in all aspects. The other question is with regard to the government's perspective and experience with regard to my own country. I can say here probably 2 points. The first one is we have, which we believe that we need to recognize the role of the women empowerment and women participation in the international trade system, not only at the national but regional but international trade system. So for that we need to have a very important step to be taken in terms of legislation. With regard to the legislation, we have a federal constitution which guarantees the equality of men, women with men, and also which gives them special measures, affirmative measures for women, because we believe that women historically there have been injustices done to them. Therefore, this is a time that we have to look into those affirmative measures to support them in a special way. That's why I was a little bit unhappy or a little bit discomfortable when I hear that WTO rules should be gender neutral. As far as I'm concerned, I think, although I understand the purpose of that, but I still believe that we need to support women in a special way. There should be these affirmative measures as far as I'm concerned. Therefore, the WTO has to look into that aspect as well, in addition to what I said with regard to technical support and other things. And when it comes to Ethiopia, of course, what we made based on this legislation, then we make sure that the gender mainstreaming is very important in all our programs and strategies, whatever we have in the country. This is a gender, it's as you know, the cross-cutting issue, so it is included in all our programs. That's why we believe. In addition to that, we believe that women should be organized. Therefore, we have different kinds of associations of women in order to help themselves, to help their society, and also in order to increase their economic opportunities in all the societal activities, socio-economic, cultural, political, and other activities. So there should be, government believe that they should be supported by providing them small saving and created access to finance, and other also support in the capacity building, as well as skill training. And we believe that inadequate training and skill entrepreneurship development is one of the major challenges that we are facing in the country. And the other one is, of course, women-friendly technologies is another problem that we face in the country. And lack of effective business networking information is another area also that we are facing as a problem in the country. But otherwise, we believe that we are doing best as far as we are concerned. I don't want to bore you with some statistics with other activities that have been going on in the country in order to empower women or increase their economic opportunities. Finally, the final question is, how do I see how this evolve in the future in the WTO? I think I personally believe that is a very good chance. Now the situation is changing. Of course, this year we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is clearly indicates that women equality is important. And we can see a change in the political and strategic thinking of the world when it comes to really the importance of increasing the opportunity for women. But there is one, as far as I'm concerned, a major issue that we have to look into it. Unfortunately, these days, the multilateral system is being questioned from different perspectives. There is a threat for the international cooperation coming from different sources. I don't want to detail. I don't want to go into the details. We know that populism is on the rise. We know that there is a tendency to look inward instead of outward. And various types of views and trends, we observe this today. So all this affects the international cooperation. When you see the international cooperation or the multilateral system, which includes also not only the UN and other, but also the WTO itself. So if the multilateral system is being questioned today, then there is no reason why the involvement, the integration of women in the international trading system is not questioned. So it is a question that we have to think about it, how we can strengthen further the multilateral system by which, as I said, international cooperation and partnership is going to be very important for the empowerment of women and increase their economic opportunities. Thank you, Suja.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Botora, for sharing what's happening on the ground in Ethiopia, but also throwing light, I think, on some of the challenges you face in the area of gender parity and women empowerment, and of course raising the challenges, the issue of the challenges we're facing to the multilateral trading system at this point in time. It's all integrated, I guess. So thank you very much. And turning to my final speaker, and that would be Deputy Permanent Representative Kaemba from Zambia. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I would like to start by commending WTO for organizing this event. In my country, Zambia, it's actually a public holiday. We lobbied and fought, and it's a public holiday. On this day, we have events that focus on women and discuss issues of women, from national level right through to the village level. So everybody in Zambia today is quite busy attending a function of some kind on women. That's how seriously we take it. I would also like to make no apologies for why are we discussing women as opposed to men. When we talk about gender, we are talking about the dynamics between men and women. But in most cases, you will find that women are the disadvantaged gender, and therefore it is important that we talk about women and find strategies on how to bridge the gap between men and women. And I would like to commend the men who are here, that you, by being here, you are showing that you are actually gender sensitive. Thank you very much for being here. The first question about what are the links between WTO and women's empowerment. Way back in China, there were the 12 areas of concern that were identified at the conference. And the 12 areas of concern, I think, cannot be achieved without economic empowerment of women. And also that translates into trade for women. And therefore, I think it is timely that we are talking about trade and women. It is the correct route that we talk about empowering women, economic empowerment of women, because when you empower women, you are actually empowering the household, the community, and the country. And therefore, whereas we know that WTO is norm setting in areas of in the area of trade, I think would like them to go further into technical assistance to programs that help to empower women. In Zambia, we have, here we have talked about the policies. In Zambia, we have a gender policy that has been put in place because you cannot work outside the box. You need to have the policy in place. And in that policy, I would like to refer to, there was a question earlier on whether we should have positive discrimination. In the pillars for economic development, there's capital, land, and labor. Labor, we have plenty from women. Capital, we do not have. Or it's very difficult for women to get capital, to access resources for development. Even land, it's not easy for a woman to get title to land. And therefore in Zambia, there has been in the policy put that there, for every allotment of land, 30% will automatically go to women. The 70%, the women will be free to fight with the men for that. And we hope that by doing that, we shall have 50% land ownership at the end of a period. This positive discrimination is necessary because if you are starting from point A and another one is starting from point D, really you cannot expect them to get to point Z at the same time unless there's positive discrimination. It is a point for discussion, but I personally think that it is a good thing. So we have 30% land set aside for women for every allotment, and then we fight for the other 70% with the men. Because it's not easy for women to fight for land with the men. It's very difficult for a woman to fill in the forms. We don't have the same level of education. And maybe even the access to information about available land is not easy. And yet, more than 70% of the women live in rural areas where they depend, where their livelihoods actually depend on land. Another barrier that needs to be looked at is the legal frameworks, especially in countries where you have customary law and statutory law. Sometimes you find that these laws are not compatible. So you need to harmonize them so that they do not discriminate against women. We have heard about e-commerce, ICT, digitalization, and so on. I think we need to take recognizance that we are all starting at different levels of education. So this would go with awareness raising, and technical assistance for awareness creation is necessary so that the women can understand what we are talking about and take advantage of the e-commerce, digitalization, ICT, and so on. I continue to give an example of Zambia. We need to create structures, I think, where we can work through, which we can work through. In Zambia, we have the Ministry of Gender, which is focused on looking at issues of gender. But they don't work as a silo on their own. They also integrate with other ministries where they have mainstreamed gender in all their planned actions. And the National Development Plan has been streamlined with gender, or gender mainstreamed. Most of the things have been covered by my colleagues, but where do we see the issue of WTO in the future? In the long term, our expectation is that WTO will be a lot more practical and hands-on, as well as do things differently in dealing with issues of women empowerment. They have started, but would like them to do more. We should not have issues bogged down on several negotiations due to technicalities and inflexibility of member states. I think we need to be aware that we have different needs and strategies should be put in place, or should be put in place so that those that are not, those that are disadvantaged within the disadvantaged group come to the same level with the others, as would like to move together at global level. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret, if I may. I don't know. I'm turning to Anush. I think I will not be able to turn the floor over to you for questions because we actually are over, I think, by 20 minutes, the time limit that had been given. So I think I would like to conclude, and I won't be able to give the floor back to the panelists at this point, but I think I would just like to conclude by making a few remarks. It's very difficult to conclude on this session. I think there was a wealth of information that was given, but I think it is clear from what was said that women's empowerment is not just essential. I think it's critical to ensure social and economic results, positive results. And as we saw, governments are recognizing this, and they're recognizing this not just by changing the regulatory framework, but it's really on the hands, on the ground sort of measures which have been taken. And in that sense, I think what Margaret said about the 30% of land which is allocated to women was interesting, and also what the ambassador of Uganda had mentioned about giving 1.5 points more for women so that they could enter the higher education institutions were interesting examples, and I think my daughters would certainly like that one. And in terms of what we can do. Clearly, several measures were mentioned, and I think there was a lot of emphasis on awareness and building awareness everywhere through technical assistance. The Aid for Trade is a nice vehicle for doing that. There was mention made of access to information, MISMEs, electronic commerce, and of course, being fully cognizant of the different situations of each country. I think that this was an important point. The ministerial decision or declaration which came out of Argentina was, I think, very important in galvanizing the attention on the issue. So sometimes that's what it takes to really move things forward. And in that sense, I really do hope it will take less than 217 years to achieve gender parity. And I would just end by saying, and I think it's something I said right at the beginning, that of course we can institute all of these changes in all different fronts. But at the end of the day, I think it's a change in mindset. You know, there has to be a change in mindset, both from the side of women. I mean, there has to be an enabling function, but there also has to be a change in mindset in how, I guess, men see women and the other way. And that has to happen really at the grassroots. And perhaps with that change, we will really make progress with all the other complementary measures. And with that, I think I will close the session and thank very much the panelists for having been here with me, and thank the audience for their attention. Thank you very much.
If I may take the floor.